My brother forged our father's will. What I found in the old safe ruined his plan. The words on the legal document in front of me blurred as I read them for the third time. I, Robert James Mitchell, being of sound mind and body, hereby revoke all previous wills and bequeath my entire estate to my eldest son, Richard Allen Mitchell. My hands shook as I looked up at the smug face of my older brother Rick, sitting across the conference table in the law office of Henderson and Associates. Behind him, our father's longtime attorney, Bernard Henderson, looked distinctly uncomfortable. "This can't be right," I said, my voice sounding hollow in the mahogany-paneled room. "Dad promised. He told me 3 months ago that everything would be split equally between the three of us." Rick's smile never reached his eyes. "Plans change, David. Dad changed his mind in his final days. He wanted someone responsible handling his legacy. The emphasis on responsible felt like a slap. I'd spent the last 5 years of my life caring for our father. 5 years of daily visits to his house on Oakwood Drive, managing his medications, driving him to doctor's appointments, sitting with him through chemotherapy sessions when the lung cancer came back. 5 years while Rick lived his comfortable life in Chicago, visiting maybe twice a year for a weekend at most. And now this. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. Your support helps us bring you more stories of justice and truth. "When was this signed?" I demanded, looking at Bernard. The old lawyer had handled my father's affairs for 30 years. He'd been at family dinners, my sister's wedding, my daughter's baptism. "January 24th, Bernard said quietly, not meeting my eyes. 6 days before your father passed. January 24th. I'd been there that day. I remembered it clearly because it was the day Dad seemed to rally, seeming more alert than he'd been in weeks. We'd watched a basketball game together, and he'd held my hand and said, 'You're a good son, David. Better than I deserved.' 'I want to see the original document,' I said, 'and I want to know who witnessed the signing.'" Rick leaned back in his chair with practiced casualness, but I caught the slight tension in his jaw. 20 years of poker nights before our falling out had taught me to read his tells. "Everything's in order, little brother. Bernard has all the proper documentation. Dad was assessed by his physician, Dr. Patricia Morrison, who confirmed he was of sound mind. The signing was witnessed by," he glanced at Bernard, "by myself and Elena Rodriguez, your father's home care nurse," Bernard finished. Something in his tone felt rehearsed, like he'd practiced this speech. Elena Rodriguez. I'd met her only 3 times, all in the final 2 weeks of Dad's life. She'd been hired through a private nursing agency, not the hospice service we'd been using for months. At the time, I'd thought it strange, but attributed it to Rick's insistence on upgraded care when he'd made his final visit. Now that decision took on a different meaning entirely. "I'd like to speak with Ms. Rodriguez," I said carefully. "That won't be possible." Rick's response came too quickly. "She's returned to the Philippines. Family emergency. Left the country 2 weeks ago." How convenient. A witness who'd signed a legal document worth $8 million had suddenly vanished to another country. I stood up, the chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound that felt like violence in the quiet room. "This isn't over. I'm going to contest this will. Dad wouldn't have cut out his other children. Not after everything." "After everything what?" Rick's mask of civility finally cracked, revealing the contempt he'd been hiding. "After you quit your job and moved back to this dead-end town to play nursemaid? After you bankrupted yourself caring for a dying man who should have been in a facility? Dad saw what you'd become, David. Dependent, directionless. He wanted his estate in capable hands. The cruelty of it stole my breath. Every sacrifice I'd made, leaving my engineering position in Minneapolis, selling my condo, ending a relationship because I couldn't be there for both my father and my girlfriend. All of it, reduced to weakness in my brother's eyes. "Get out," Bernard said suddenly, addressing Rick. His voice carried an authority I hadn't expected. "Both of you, I need to review some additional documents. David, I'll contact you within the week." Rick's eyes narrowed. "Bernie, we had an agreement." "Out." Bernard's face had gone pale, but his voice remained firm. Now, in the parking lot of Henderson and Associates, The March cold bit through my jacket. Rick was already pulling away in his Tesla, leaving me standing next to my 10-year-old Honda, the same car I'd driven Dad to countless appointments. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister Jennifer, who lived in Seattle with her husband and 2 kids. Just heard about the will. David, I'm so sorry. Rick called me yesterday and said Dad left everything to him. He offered me $50,000 out of goodness of his heart. I told him where he could shove his goodness. At least I wasn't alone in this betrayal. Jenny had been closer to Dad than Rick ever was, even from across the country. She'd video called him every Sunday without fail, sent care packages, arranged for his favorite meals to be delivered. $50,000 out of an $8 million estate. But Rick's goodness. I sat in my car for 10 minutes trying to process what had just happened. The will had been dated January 24th, but something about that date nagged at me. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my calendar, my photos, anything that might jog my memory, and then I found it. A photo I'd taken on January 24th, time-stamped at 2:47 p.m. Dad and I, sitting on his couch watching the Lakers game. He was smiling, lucid, his arm around my shoulders. In the background, visible on his kitchen table, was the mail I'd brought in that afternoon, and the time on his wall clock read 2:47 p.m. According to the will Bernard had shown me, Dad had signed the new document at 2:30 p.m. on January 24th, in the presence of Bernard and Elena Rodriguez. But I'd been with my father at 2:30 p.m. on January 24th. We'd been alone in his house. No Bernard, no Elena Rodriguez, no signing ceremony. The will was a forgery. My hands gripped the steering wheel as realization crystallized into something cold and focused. My brother, a respected attorney in Chicago, a man who'd built his career on trust and legal ethics, had fabricated our father's final wishes. He'd somehow recruited Bernard Henderson and Elena Rodriguez into a conspiracy to steal $8 million. They'd counted on me being too grief-stricken, too overwhelmed, too directionless to fight back. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I started the car and drove not toward home, but toward Dad's house on Oakwood Drive. The property was technically in probate now, but I still had my key. More importantly, I had something Rick didn't know about. When Dad's dementia had started getting worse 3 years ago, before the cancer diagnosis, he'd become paranoid about important documents. He'd made me help him install a wall safe in his bedroom closet, hidden behind a false panel. Only Dad and I knew the combination. 06/08/41, my mother's birthday. The mother Rick had barely visited before her death from a stroke in 2019. Inside that safe were documents Dad had told me to protect in case anyone ever tries to pull something. At the time, I'd thought he was just being cautious about identity theft or financial fraud. Now I wondered if some part of him had suspected that his own son might betray him. The house felt empty and wrong without Dad's presence. His recliner still sat in its spot by the window, the TV remote on the side table where he'd left it. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the coffee I'd made him 3 weeks ago. The morning before, he'd gone into his final decline. I walked upstairs to his bedroom, past the hospital bed that had been delivered during his last week, and opened the closet. The false panel came away easily, revealing the digital safe. 060841. The safe opened with a metallic click that sounded deafening in the silent house. Inside were folders exactly as Dad had left them. Legal documents, insurance policies, property deeds, bank account information, and something I hadn't expected to find, a small digital camera, the kind you could set up for home security. My hands trembled as I pulled out a folder labeled Last Will and Testament, Original. Inside was a document dated March 15, 2021, almost 3 years ago, when Dad had first been diagnosed with cancer. The will split his estate equally among his 3 children, Richard, David, and Jennifer. It was signed, notarized, and completely legitimate. But that wasn't what made my breath catch in my throat. Underneath the will was a DVD in a plastic case. On it, written in Dad's shaky handwriting, were the words, "Watch this if anything seems wrong. Dad." I carried the DVD downstairs to Dad's living room, my heart hammering against my ribs. The old Dell laptop I'd set up for him 2 years ago still sat on his desk, covered with a thin layer of dust. It took 3 tries to get my shaking hands to insert the disk properly. The screen flickered to life, and there was my father. Not the frail, wasted man from his final weeks, but Dad from nearly 6 months ago. August, maybe early September, when he could still walk without assistance, and his mind was mostly clear. He was sitting in his favorite chair, the afternoon light streaming through the window behind him, making his white hair glow like a halo. "David," he began, and his voice, his voice, strong and certain, almost broke me. "If you're watching this, then something's gone wrong with my will. Something I was afraid might happen." He paused, clearing his throat. The camera shook slightly as he adjusted it. "I need you to listen carefully, son. About 3 months ago, Rick came to visit. Said he was worried about my finances, about making sure everything was properly structured for tax purposes. He brought some papers for me to sign. Said they were just power of attorney updates, medical directives, that sort of thing." Dad's face tightened with anger I rarely saw from him. "But your old man wasn't born yesterday. I read every word before I signed anything. And you know what I found on page 17, buried in legal language? A clause that would have made Rick the sole trustee of my estate, with complete discretionary control over distributions to you and Jenny." My stomach dropped. "I refused to sign it," Dad continued. "Told him absolutely not. We had a hell of a fight. Worst argument we've had since he was a teenager. He said I was being senile, that I needed someone competent, managing things. Implied that you were taking advantage of me, David." "Taking advantage?" Dad's voice cracked with emotion, as if the son who gave up everything to care for me was the problem, not the one who shows up twice a year expecting gratitude. He wiped his eyes, composing himself. "Rick left angry that day. But here's what worries me, son." 2 weeks later, Bernie Henderson called me, asked if I'd consider updating my will to reflect current family circumstances. Bernie's been my lawyer for 30 years, but he's also been Rick's golf buddy for the last 10. When I asked him who suggested he call me, he got real quiet and changed the subject. The pieces were clicking into place with sickening clarity. "I'm recording this on September 3rd, 2024, Dad said, leaning closer to the camera. "My will, my real will, the one I signed in 2021, leaves everything split equally between you 3 kids. That's in the safe behind the panel we installed. The combination is your mother's birthday." "You're the only other person who knows about that safe, David." He pointed at the camera, his finger trembling slightly. "If anyone, and I mean anyone, presents a will that says different, you fight it. You hear me? Bernard Henderson has a copy of my real will in his office safe. If he claims otherwise, if he produces some other document, then he's been compromised. Probably by your brother." Dad sat back, suddenly looking older and more tired. "I don't want to believe Rick would do something like this. He's my son. I love him, despite everything. But I've seen how he looks at money, David. How he talks about optimizing and maximizing value. To him, people are assets to be managed or liabilities to be minimized." There was a long pause. Dad stared directly into the camera, his blue eyes, the same color as mine, filled with a sadness that went beyond his physical illness. "I'm dying, David. The doctors give me maybe a year, probably less. And I'm not afraid of death. I've had a good life, made my mistakes, loved your mother, raised 3 children. But I am afraid of what happens after I'm gone. Afraid that this family I built will tear itself apart over money I earned digging ditches and pouring concrete for 40 years. He leaned forward again, urgent now. "In that safe, there's another folder. It's labeled insurance policies, but that's misdirection. Inside are bank statements showing all my accounts as of today, September 3rd. Property deeds, stock certificates, business valuations, everything documented down to the last dollar. I'm worth about $8.2 million, give or take, including the house and the commercial property on Riverside. I'd known Dad was comfortable, but $8 million. He'd always lived modestly, driving the same Ford F-150 for 15 years, shopping at Costco, refusing to move to a fancy retirement place. There's also something else in that folder." Dad continued, his voice dropping. Proof that Rick has been having financial problems. Bad investments, a gambling habit he thinks nobody knows about, debt from that failed restaurant venture in Chicago. Your sister Jenny found out about it accidentally. Saw documents at Rick's house during Christmas 2 years ago. She told me, but asked me not to confront him. Said he was ashamed and trying to fix it. The camera zoomed in slightly as Dad adjusted it again. I didn't confront him, but I did have a forensic accountant friend quietly look into his finances. Rick owes about $740,000 to various creditors. His law practice is barely breaking even. That Tesla he drives, leased. That penthouse apartment, mortgaged to the hilt. He's living on credit and reputation. Everything suddenly made horrible sense. Rick hadn't visited out of duty or love. He'd been circling like a vulture, waiting for the inheritance that would save him from financial ruin. So here's what I'm telling you, David. Dad's voice strengthened with determination. If Rick tries to cheat you and Jenny out of what's rightfully yours, you have my permission. Hell, my blessing. To fight back with everything you got. Use the documents in that safe. Hire the best lawyers. Contest any suspicious will. And if Bernard Henderson is involved, report him to the State Bar Association. Dad smiled then, a flash of the humor that had defined him before the illness. Your brother always underestimated you. Thought, because you weren't flashy or ambitious like him, you were somehow less. But I know different. You've got your mother's brains and my stubborn streak. That's a dangerous combination when someone pushes you too far. He reached forward, and the camera shook as he prepared to turn it off. I love you, son. I'm proud of the man you've become. Don't let anyone, not even your brother, take what you've earned through loyalty and sacrifice. Your mother would be proud of you too. Now go get 'em. The screen went black. I sat in the silence of my father's empty house and cried for the first time since his funeral. Not from grief, though that was there, but from rage at having my father's worst fears confirmed. Rick had done exactly what Dad had predicted. He'd forged a will, co-opted Dad's lawyer, and tried to steal everything. But Dad had left me a roadmap to fight back. I wiped my eyes and returned to the safe. The insurance policies folder was exactly where Dad said it would be. Inside were dozens of documents, each one a piece of evidence that would build my case. Bank statements from September 2024 showing accounts totaling $3.2 million across 4 different banks. Each statement had Dad's signature and notarization. Property deeds for the house on Oakwood Drive, valued at $850,000. The commercial building on Riverside Avenue, valued at $2.1 million, currently leased to 3 small businesses, and a lake cabin in northern Wisconsin I'd forgotten about, valued at $380,000. Stock portfolios with 3 different brokerages, totaling approximately $1.6 million. Dad had been more financially savvy than he'd ever let on. Life insurance policy for $500,000 with me, listed as the beneficiary. At least Rick couldn't touch that. And then I found the folder that made my hands shake with anger. Private Investigator's Report on Richard Allen Mitchell, dated July 15, 2024. 47 pages, detailing my brother's financial collapse, credit card debt, $287,000 across 11 cards, personal loans $190,000 from 3 different lenders, gambling losses $263,000 over 18 months at various casinos in Illinois and Indiana, outstanding legal judgments $142,000 from the failed restaurant investment where he'd been sued by former business partners, mortgage on his Chicago condo, $680,000, currently 3 months behind on payments, total debt approximately $150 million against declared assets of less than $400,000. My brother wasn't just struggling, he was drowning, and he'd seen Dad's estate as his life raft. The report included photographs. Rick entering the Riverside Casino in Hammond, Indiana. Rick meeting with a loan shark in a parking garage. Actual loan shark, not a licensed lender, based on the investigator's notes. Rick at the Illinois Secretary of State's office, where his law license had apparently been flagged for potential suspension due to client complaints about missed court dates and poor communication. Richard Allen Mitchell, the golden child who'd graduated from Northwestern Law, who'd built a practice representing Fortune 500 companies, who'd lectured me about responsibility and success, was a fraud. A desperate, debt-ridden fraud willing to steal from his dying father. The evidence spread across Dad's dining room table told a story that would destroy Rick's carefully constructed image. But I needed more. I needed proof of the forgery itself, proof of the conspiracy between Rick, Bernard Henderson, and the mysteriously departed Elena Rodriguez. I pulled out my phone and called Jenny in Seattle. She answered on the second ring. "David, are you okay? I've been worried sick since I heard about the will. Jenny, I need you to tell me everything you remember about Elena Rodriguez. Every detail. The nurse. David, I only met her once during my last visit in January. Rick had hired her through some private agency. She seemed professional, I guess, but there was something off about her." "Off how?" Jenny paused, thinking. She kept deferring to Rick for everything. When I asked her about Dad's medication schedule, she'd look at Rick before answering. When I wanted to know about Dad's pain management, she said Rick had given her specific instructions. It felt less like she was Dad's nurse and more like she was Rick's employee. What agency did she come from? I don't know. Rick handled all that. Said the hospice service wasn't adequate and Dad needed specialized care for his final weeks. Jenny's voice tightened with suspicion. "David, what did you find?" I told her everything. The safe, the video, the documents, the evidence of Rick's financial collapse. The proof that the will was forged because I'd been with Dad when it was supposedly signed. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "Jenny? That son of a bitch!" Her voice was cold, controlled. "That absolute son of a bitch. He called me 3 days ago, David. Told me Dad had left everything to him, but he was generously offering me $50,000 because family is important. He made it sound like charity, like he was doing me a favor. He's desperate, drowning in debt. He needed Dad's estate to survive. Well, he's not getting it." Jenny's anger matched my own. "I'm flying out tomorrow. We're going to bury him, David. Legally, publicly, completely." After we hung up, I sat at Dad's table and began organizing the evidence into categories. Financial motive, Rick's $156 million debt timeline inconsistency, my photo proving I was with Dad when the will was supposedly signed, witness credibility, Elena Rodriguez's convenient disappearance pattern of deception, Rick's previous attempt to gain control through power of attorney, Dad's intent, the video and the original 2021 will. But I needed one more piece. I needed to know how Bernard Henderson had been compromised. A 30-year attorney-client relationship didn't end overnight without significant leverage. I pulled out my laptop and began researching. Bernard Henderson, age 67, partner at Henderson & Associates for 42 years. Married to Patricia Henderson, née Morrison, for 39 years. 2 adult children. Member of the Davenport County Bar Association, the Rotary Club, and I stopped scrolling. The Riverside Casino Resort Investor Group. According to a business filing from 18 months ago, Bernard Henderson had invested $300,000 in a proposed casino expansion project in Hammond, Indiana, the same casino where Rick had been photographed gambling. I cross-referenced the dates. Bernard's investment, March 2023. Rick's first documented gambling losses at that casino, April 2023. They'd known each other's secrets. Rick knew Bernard had made a risky investment, probably kept quiet from his partners. Bernard knew Rick was a gambling addict burning through money. And when the casino expansion project failed, I found the bankruptcy filing dated November 2024. Bernard had lost everything he'd invested. $300,000 gone. That was the leverage. Rick had probably offered Bernard a cut of the inheritance in exchange for cooperation. A desperate lawyer with $300,000 in losses and a guilty conscience would be vulnerable to an equally desperate attorney offering salvation. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Bernard Henderson. We need to talk, privately. Can you meet me at my office tomorrow morning at 7 a.m.? Come alone. This is important. BH. I stared at the message. Either this was a trap or Bernard's conscience was finally bothering him. Only one way to find out. I typed back, I'll be there. Then I spent the next 3 hours photographing every document in Dad's safe, uploading them to 3 separate cloud storage accounts, and emailing copies to Jenny with instructions. If anything happens to me, take these to the FBI. Rick thought he was playing chess with an unsophisticated opponent. He'd underestimated the man who'd spent 5 years managing a dying man's complex medical care, finances, and legal affairs, who'd negotiated with insurance companies, Medicare bureaucrats, and pharmaceutical corporations. My brother was about to discover that caregiving required the same skills as warfare: patience, strategy, and the ability to stay calm under pressure. Tomorrow morning, I'd find out if Bernard Henderson was an enemy or an unexpected ally. But either way, the real war was about to begin. Henderson and Associates occupied the 3rd floor of the Davenport building downtown, the same office where Dad had signed his first business contracts 40 years ago. I arrived at 6:47 a.m., 13 minutes early, and found Bernard Henderson already waiting in the parking garage, standing next to his Mercedes like a man about to confess a murder. He looked terrible. The confident attorney from 3 days ago had been replaced by someone who'd aged a decade in 72 hours. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, and his hands shook as he gestured me toward the elevator. "Not the office," he said quietly. "But there are cameras, recording devices. Rick had them installed 2 months ago when we started, when the planning began." My stomach tightened. Planning. Just walk with me, please. We drove separately to Riverside Park, the same place where Dad used to take us fishing when we were kids. At 7 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, it was deserted except for a few joggers and a man walking his dog. Bernard led me to a picnic table, overlooking the water, far from any other people. "I need to tell you something," he began, not meeting my eyes. "And then I need you to decide whether to turn me into the authorities or give me a chance to make this right." "I'm listening." Bernard pulled out a flask from his jacket pocket, took a long drink, then set it on the table between us. His hands were trembling so badly the metal rattled against the wood. "Your brother approached me last November, said he was worried about your father's estate planning, wanted to make sure everything was structured properly for tax purposes. I'd known Rick since he was a kid, watched him graduate law school, even wrote him a recommendation letter for his first firm. I trusted him." Bernard's voice cracked. "He took me to lunch at the Riverside Country Club. Expensive place, beautiful view. Started asking about my investments, how business was going, and God help me, I was vulnerable. I'd lost $300,000 on that casino expansion project. Patricia didn't know. My partner didn't know. I'd taken the money from our retirement savings, convinced it would triple our investment." He took another drink. "Rick somehow found out. Don't ask me how, but he knew exact amounts, dates, everything. Said he'd come across the information doing routine background research. But that's bullshit. He investigated me like I was a hostile witness. He blackmailed you. Not directly. He was too smart for that." Bernard's laugh was bitter. He said he was concerned about my financial stress and how it might affect my judgment. Suggested that if anyone found out I'd gambled with client escrow funds, which I hadn't, but who would believe me once the accusation was made, I'd lose my license, my practice, everything I'd built in 42 years. The morning sun was rising over the water, beautiful and indifferent to the confession unfolding at its edge. Then he made his offer. Help him update your father's will, and he'd cut me in for $500,000 after the estate settled. Enough to cover my casino losses and restore the retirement fund before Patricia ever found out. You agreed. Bernard's face crumpled. I agreed. God forgive me. I agreed. But David, you have to understand. Your father was dying. The doctors said weeks, maybe a month. I told myself I was just accelerating an inevitable process. That Rick was the oldest son. That he'd take care of you and Jenny, that it wouldn't really matter in the long run. Except Dad wanted his estate split equally. He told you that explicitly. He did. Bernard's voice was barely a whisper. In 2021, when he signed the real will. And again in August, when Rick first tried to get power of attorney. Your father was sharp as a tack, even with the cancer. He knew what Rick was trying to do, and he shut it down. I pulled out my phone and showed Bernard the photo from January 24th. This is time-stamped at 2:47 p.m. I was with my father all afternoon that day, alone. No signing ceremony. No witnesses. Bernard stared at the photo, and something broke in his expression. The will we showed you was signed on January 18th, not the 24th. Rick changed the date afterward, to create more distance from Robert's death, make it seem less suspicious. But he choked on the words. We forged Robert's signature. Elena Rodriguez witnessed my signature. I witnessed hers, and Rick provided a signature sample he'd practiced for weeks. My hands clenched into fists. Where is Elena Rodriguez? And don't tell me the Philippines. She's in Scottsdale, Arizona, living in a condo Rick rented for her under a shell company name. He paid her $25,000 cash to play the role of hospice nurse for 2 weeks, witness the forged will, and then disappear. She's not even a licensed nurse, David. She's an actress Rick found through some online service that provides talent for legal scenarios. His words, not mine. An actress. My father's final days had been attended by a hired performer, while his real hospice nurses were mysteriously given time off. Rick had orchestrated the entire deception, like a stage production. Why are you telling me this? I demanded. Why now? Bernard finally looked at me directly, tears streaming down his weathered face. Because I can't sleep. Because every time I close my eyes, I see your father's face. Because yesterday my granddaughter, she's 7 years old, asked me if I was one of the good guys or bad guys. He wiped his eyes roughly. I couldn't answer her, David. I couldn't tell my own granddaughter that I'm one of the good guys because I'm not. I'm a criminal, a fraud, a disgrace to every oath I ever took. The old lawyer pulled an envelope from his jacket and slid it across the picnic table. That's a full confession. Signed, notarized, witnessed by another attorney at my firm who I trust absolutely. It details everything. The blackmail, the forgery, Elena Rodriguez's real identity and location, Rick's payment arrangements, the whole conspiracy. It's yours to do with as you see fit. I opened the envelope. 10 pages of detailed confession. Every sentence a nail in Bernard's professional coffin. And Rick's. There's more, Bernard continued. Rick's planning to file a motion next week to have the estate settled immediately. He's got creditors circling, and he needs that money fast. He's going to argue that any challenge from you or Jenny is frivolous, motivated by greed, rather than legitimate concern. He's prepared testimony from 3 character witnesses who will claim your father privately expressed disappointment in you. Who? Rick's business associates. People who never met your father but owe Rick legal favors. He's building a narrative that Robert died disappointed in his younger son, that he made the will change as a result of your failures and dependency. The audacity was breathtaking. Rick wasn't just stealing money. He was trying to rewrite our father's final opinion of me. Why would you help him if you knew all this? Bernard's hands stopped shaking as he seemed to come to a decision. Because I'm a coward, David. A weak, frightened old man who chose his own comfort over someone else's justice. But I'm also the only witness you have who can testify to the forgery from the inside. Rick can't make me disappear like he did Elena Rodriguez. I'm too connected, too visible. If I come forward voluntarily, the state bar might show lenience. I might keep some shred of dignity. He stood up, suddenly looking 10 years older than his 67 years. I loved your father. He was my first major client, helped me build my practice, came to my daughter's wedding, sent flowers when Patricia had her cancer scare. What I did to him, what I did to his memory, is unforgivable. But maybe I can make it slightly less unforgivable by helping you destroy the man who corrupted me. I studied Bernard Henderson, crooked lawyer, co-conspirator, and now apparently my most valuable witness. Could I trust him? Probably not completely. Was his confession self-serving? Absolutely. But was it useful? Devastatingly so. I need you to do something for me, I said carefully. Something that might be illegal, but is definitely unethical. Bernard laughed, a sound like broken glass. I've already lost everything that matters, David. What's one more ethics violation? I need you to give me Rick's case files. Everything he prepared for the estate settlement. His witness list, his arguments, his strategy memos, everything. That would violate attorney-client privilege. So did forging my father's will. Bernard nodded slowly. Fair point. When do you need them? Today. And I need the original forged will, not a copy. With Rick's fingerprints on it, your signature, Elena's signature, the physical evidence. It's in my office safe. I can have it by noon. I stood up, pocketing Bernard's confession. One more thing. Does Rick know you're having second thoughts? Not yet, but he will soon. I told him yesterday I was uncomfortable with the accelerated timeline. He said, Bernard's face darkened. He said, if I got cold feet now, he'd make sure the state bar found out about my casino investment through an anonymous tip. Even threatened to fabricate evidence that I'd actually stolen client funds. So he's threatening you now. Threatening me. Manipulating me. Treating me like I'm his employee, rather than his co-conspirator. Rick's desperate. David. People with that much debt and that much to lose make dangerous decisions. We parted ways in the parking lot. Bernard drove toward his office to gather the evidence that would destroy both him and Rick. I drove toward the public library where I could use their computers without leaving a digital trail at home, because Bernard's confession had given me the final piece I needed. Rick's desperation made him predictable, and predictable enemies could be maneuvered into destroying themselves. Section 2. Ghosts and Strategy. The Davenport Public Library opened at 9 a.m. I was waiting at the doors with a large coffee and a thumb drive containing encrypted copies of every document from Dad's safe. The reference librarian, Mrs. Chen, had known me since I was 12 years old and checking out engineering books. David Mitchell, she said warmly. Haven't seen you in here for months. How are you holding up? Getting by, Mrs. Chen. Could I use one of the private study rooms? I've got some research to do. She gave me a key to room 3C, a windowless space with a computer, desk, and door that locked from the inside. Perfect for what I needed. I spent the next 4 hours building two things: a timeline of the conspiracy and a dossier on my brother. The conspiracy. Timeline July 15, 2024. Dad hires private investigator to research Rick's finances August 3, 2024. Rick visits Dad, attempts to get power of attorney, is refused. Every step carefully planned. Every witness either bribed or blackmailed. Every loose end tied up except one: me. Rick had assumed I'd be too grief-stricken and financially dependent to mount a serious challenge. He'd counted on me accepting a token settlement rather than fighting. He'd forgotten that I'd spent 5 years managing a complex caregiving operation, coordinating doctors, insurance companies, medical equipment suppliers, pharmaceutical companies, hospice services, physical therapists, and home care agencies. I'd negotiated with bureaucracies that made legal conspiracies look simple. I pulled up the private investigator's report on Rick and began building a second dossier. This one focused on exploitable vulnerabilities. Richard Allen Mitchell, pressure points, financial collapse, total debt, $156 monthly burn rate, approximately $47,000 mortgage 3 months behind. Foreclosure proceedings begin at 4 months. 3 credit cards in default, collection agencies involved, 2 personal loans with non-bank lending solutions, loan sharks, at 34% APR, estimated time until complete financial collapse. 6 straight weeks. The portrait that emerged was of a man in complete freefall, grasping at anything to stop his descent. The inheritance wasn't just about money. It was about survival, ego, and avoiding the public humiliation of financial ruin, which meant he'd fight dirty, very dirty. My phone buzzed. Text from Jenny. Landed in Des Moines, driving to Davenport now. Meet me at Dad's house at 2 p.m. I checked the time, 12:47 p.m. That gave me an hour to meet Bernard and collect the evidence before Jenny arrived. See you there. Bring a lot of coffee. We have a war to plan. Bernard was waiting in the parking lot of a gas station on Highway 61, far from any security cameras or witnesses. He looked worse than he had at dawn, if that was possible. The manila envelope he handed me through my car window felt like it weighed 10 pounds. "Everything's there," he said. "The original forged will, Rick's case files for the estate settlement, his witness prep notes, communications between us about the conspiracy, and," he hesitated, "and a recording." "Recording of what?" "Rick and I met at my office 2 weeks ago to finalize the estate filing strategy. I was wearing a wire, not because I was planning to betray him, but because I didn't trust him not to betray me first. The recording proves Rick's knowledge of the forgery, his bribery of Elena Rodriguez, and his plans to file false testimony against you." I stared at Bernard. "You recorded your own co-conspirator." "Like I said, I didn't trust him. Rick has a history of sacrificing partners when things go wrong. I wanted insurance." Bernard's smile was grim. "Turns out my paranoia was justified. He's already started distancing himself from me in case this blows up. Yesterday, he sent me an email suggesting that if anyone questioned the will, he'd testify that I acted alone, that I forged it without his knowledge. Honor among thieves. There's no honor in any of this, David. Just cowardice, greed, and self-preservation." Bernard stepped back from my car. "One more thing. Rick's planning to visit your father's house today around 3 p.m. Says he needs to inventory the personal property for estate purposes. But I think he's looking for something. The safe, probably. If there's anything in that house you don't want him to find, move it now." I thanked Bernard and drove toward Oakwood Drive. Mind racing. Rick was coming to search Dad's house. He probably suspected that Dad had kept documentation, evidence, something that could undermine the forged will. He was right to be paranoid. But he was 3 days too late. Jenny was already at Dad's house when I arrived, sitting on the front porch steps with coffee from the Caribou down the street. She stood up when I pulled in, and I saw our mother's determination in her face. The same expression Mom had worn when taking on the school board over a policy she disagreed with, or negotiating with insurance companies over Dad's medical bills before she died. We hugged without words. Some things were beyond language. "Show me everything," she said. We spent 90 minutes in Dad's home office, reviewing every piece of evidence I'd collected. Jenny, trained as a CPA before she'd left corporate life to raise kids, understood financial documents better than I did. She created spreadsheets, cross-referenced dates, highlighted inconsistencies. "Rick is so screwed," she said finally, leaning back in Dad's desk chair. "This isn't just will forgery. It's wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, probably elder abuse for targeting Dad during his final illness. We're talking federal crimes with prison time. Bernard's willing to testify. Bernard's saving his own ass, but yeah, his testimony destroys Rick completely." Jenny pulled up something on her laptop. "I've been researching estate attorneys. The best probate litigator in Iowa is Margaret Chen. No relation to Mrs. Chen at the library. She's based in Des Moines. Costs a fortune, but she's never lost a will contest case. Never. How much is a fortune? Her retainer is $50,000. After that, it's $750 an hour." I winced. I had maybe $35,000 in savings after 5 years of reduced income. "I can't afford that." "I can." Jenny's voice was steel. "David, you gave up 5 years of your life and probably $300,000 in lost income to care for Dad. You sold your condo, left your job, sacrificed a relationship. You earned that inheritance 10 times over. I'm covering the legal fees." "Jenny, this isn't a discussion. Mom and Dad taught us that family takes care of family. You took care of Dad. Now I'm taking care of you." She stood up. "Besides, I'm not doing this just for you. Rick offered me $50,000 out of an $8 million estate. That's not generosity. It's an insult. I want him to answer for that in court." I felt something unclench in my chest, the fear that I'd be fighting this battle alone. "Rick's coming here today at 3 p.m., I told her. "Looking for the safe, probably." Jenny checked her watch. 2:36 p.m. "Good. I want to see his face when he realizes we're not rolling over." "You sure? This could get ugly." My sister's smile reminded me of why her corporate nickname had been the Terminator before she'd left to have kids. "David, I negotiated billion-dollar mergers for 7 years. Rick's a small-time con artist with a gambling problem. I'll eat him alive. At exactly 2:58 p.m., Rick's Tesla pulled into the driveway. Rick stepped out of his Tesla, wearing what I'd come to recognize as his courtroom armor, a charcoal Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, Italian leather shoes, and the Rolex Dad had given him for his law school graduation. Every inch the successful attorney, if you didn't know about the maxed-out credit cards paying for the costume. His confident smile faltered when he saw both of us waiting on the porch. "David, Jenny," he recovered quickly, spreading his arms in a gesture of surprised pleasure. "I didn't know you were in town, sis. You should have called." "Should I have?" Jenny's voice was pleasant ice. "The way you called to tell me you were stealing our inheritance." Rick's expression flickered, just for a moment, before the lawyer's mask snapped back into place. "I don't know what David's told you, but there's been a misunderstanding. Dad left the estate to me. Yes, but I've been more than generous in offering you both. $50,000. Jenny descended the porch steps like a prosecutor approaching a hostile witness. "Out of $8 million. That's 0.625%, Rick. In corporate terms, we'd call that a rounding error." Dad made his wishes clear. Rick's jaw tightened. "I understand you're upset, but the will is legally binding. If you want to contest it, that's your right, but you'll lose and waste whatever money you have left on legal fees." I watched my brother lie with the smooth confidence of someone who'd spent years in courtrooms. If I didn't know the truth, I might have believed him. "Why are you here, Rick?" I asked quietly. "Estate business. I need to inventory Dad's personal property, secure any valuables, make sure nothing's disturbed before the probate court's assessment." He moved toward the porch steps, but Jenny didn't budge. "If you'll excuse me." "No." Rick stopped, his polite facade cracking. "No, this is still Dad's house," I said, standing up. "The estate hasn't been settled. You don't have legal authority to enter the property without a court order or the consent of all heirs. I'm the executor of the estate, David. I have every right. Based on a will we're contesting," Jenny interrupted. Which means your authority as executor is disputed. Until that's resolved, this house remains under probate protection, and you're trespassing." Rick's face flushed red. "You can't keep me out of my own father's house." "Our father's house," I corrected. "And yes, we can. Unless you'd like to explain to a judge why you're so eager to access the property before the inventory's complete." The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled taut. I could see Rick calculating, weighing options, trying to figure out how much we knew. "What did Bernard tell you?" he asked finally. Jenny and I exchanged glances. Rick had just confirmed Bernard's defection with a single, panicked question. "Why don't you tell us what Bernard should tell us?" Jenny suggested, pulling out her phone. "I'm recording this conversation, by the way. Iowa's a one-party consent state, so that's completely legal." Rick's eyes darted to the phone, then back to us. "Put that away." "No, Jenny, I'm warning you. Warning me." My sister's laugh could have cut glass. "Rick, I spent 7 years negotiating with people who make you look like an amateur. Don't threaten me unless you're prepared to follow through. And trust me, you don't want to see what happens if you try." Rick took a step back, his lawyer's composure finally shattering. "You, too, don't understand. The debt, the creditors, I needed this. I'm drowning, and Dad's money was supposed to." He stopped, realizing what he'd just admitted. "Supposed to save you," I finished. "From your gambling debts, your failed restaurant investment, the loan sharks charging 34% interest." Rick's face went white. "How do you—" "Dad knew everything." I pulled out my phone and played a 30-second clip from Dad's video. Dad's voice echoed across the quiet street. "Rick owes about $740,000 to various creditors. His law practice is barely breaking even. That Tesla he drives, leased. That penthouse apartment, mortgaged to the hilt." I stopped the recording. Rick looked like he might vomit. "Dad hired a private investigator last July," Jenny said, her voice devoid of sympathy. "Documented everything. Your casino visits, your meetings with loan sharks, your financial collapse. He knew you were coming for his money, Rick. He just didn't know you'd be willing to forge his will to get it. I didn't, Rick started, then stopped. The lie wouldn't come. We could see it dying on his lips. You didn't what? I pressed. Didn't forge Dad's signature on a will dated January 24th. Except I was with Dad all afternoon that day. I have photos, timestamps, witnesses who saw us together. The will's a fake, Rick. We both know it. Rick's hands clenched into fists at his sides. The polished attorney was gone, replaced by something desperate and cornered. You can't prove anything, can't we? Jenny tilted her head, studying him like a specimen. Let's see.
We have Dad's original will from 2021, properly signed and notarized. We have his video testimony recorded in September, warning us about exactly this scenario. We have documentation of your financial collapse, providing clear motive.
We have timeline inconsistencies proving the forgery. And, she paused for effect, we have Bernard Henderson's full confession, signed, notarized, detailing the entire conspiracy, including the part where you blackmailed him with his casino investment losses. Rick actually stumbled backward, grabbing the porch railing for support. Bernard wouldn't. He can't. That would destroy him. He knows, I said quietly. He's already destroyed. But he's choosing to take you down with him, rather than let you get away with this. Plus, Jenny added, we have Elena Rodriguez's real identity and location. You know, the actress you hired to play hospice nurse? She's in Scottsdale, not the Philippines. How long do you think it'll take us to subpoena her testimony once she finds out she's facing felony conspiracy charges? Rick's breathing had gone shallow. His eyes darted between us. The house, his car, calculating escape routes like a trapped animal. You're bluffing. Am I? I pulled out the manila envelope Bernard had given me. This is the original forged will, with your fingerprints all over it. Bernard kept it as insurance in case you tried to betray him, which, according to his testimony, you absolutely were planning to do. I watched my brother's world collapse in real time. Every careful plan, every manipulation, every lie, all of it, unraveling because he'd underestimated the people he'd betrayed. Here's what's going to happen, Jenny said, her voice cold and precise. Tomorrow morning, we're filing a formal will contest with the probate court. We're submitting all evidence of forgery, conspiracy, and fraud. We're requesting an emergency hearing to freeze all estate assets pending investigation. And we're forwarding everything to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. You're going to prison, Rick, I added, for a long time. Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, forgery, bribery of witnesses. Federal prosecutors are going to have a field day with this. Rick's face had gone from white to gray. You'd do that? Send your own brother to prison? You forged our dying father's will. Jenny's voice cracked with genuine anger for the first time. You stole his final wishes, mocked his memory, and tried to cheat us out of what he wanted us to have. You're damn right we'd send you to prison. I can fix this, Rick said suddenly, desperately. We can work something out, split the estate 3 ways like Dad wanted. Nobody has to know about any of this. We're family, David. Jenny, we can work this out. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Now you want to negotiate, now that you're caught. I made mistakes. I was desperate. But we don't have to destroy each other over this. Rick's voice took on the persuasive tone he probably used with juries. Think about what this will do to the family name. Dad built a reputation in this community for 40 years. You want to drag it through a public scandal? Newspapers reporting that his son forged his will. His lawyer betrayed him. His final days were attended by a fake nurse. Jenny laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're actually trying to guilt us after what you did. I'm trying to save us all from unnecessary pain. Rick turned to me. David, you're a good person. Dad always said so. You don't want this ugliness. Take your share of the estate. Invest it. Rebuild your life. Why drag everything through the courts when we can resolve it privately? For just a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. My older brother, who'd been everything Dad wanted. Successful lawyer, big city career, impressive credentials, reduced to begging on a front porch. Then I remembered Dad's voice on the recording. The man actually believes I love him. No, I said simply. No. No deal, no negotiation, no private settlement. I stood up, facing Rick across the porch. You had a chance to do the right thing, Rick. When Dad was dying, you could have been there for him. When he told you no to the power of attorney, you could have respected his wishes. Even after he died, you could have honored the real will. But you didn't. You chose greed over family, deception over honor, crime over character. I took a step closer. So here's my offer. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow to turn yourself into the district attorney's office. Confess everything, cooperate fully, and maybe they'll offer you a plea deal that doesn't involve a decade in federal prison. That's the only mercy you're getting from me. Rick's face twisted with rage and fear. You self-righteous bastard. You think you're so much better than me. You're just a failed engineer who spent 5 years sponging off our dying father. Jenny stepped between us before I could respond. Get off this property. Now. Before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. This isn't over. Rick's voice shook with impotent fury. I'll fight this. I'll drag you both through every court in Iowa. I'll spend every last dollar I have. You don't have any dollars, I reminded him. That's why you're here. Rick turned and stalked toward his Tesla, then spun back around. You know what? That's why you're here. Rick turned and stalked toward his Tesla, then spun back around. You know what the funny thing is? Dad always thought you were weak, David. Soft, not tough enough for the real world. He told me that, multiple times. Said he worried you'd never amount to anything without someone taking care of you. The lie was designed to hurt, and for a split second, it did. Then I remembered Dad's video. You've got your mother's brains and my stubborn streak. That's a dangerous combination when someone pushes you too far. If Dad thought I was weak, I said quietly, why did he trust me with the combination to his safe? Why did he record a video specifically for me, warning me about you? Why did he spend his last months making sure I'd have the tools to fight back? Rick had no answer to that. Go home, Rick, Jenny said tiredly. Hire a criminal defense attorney. You're going to need one. We watched Rick's Tesla peel out of the driveway, leaving rubber marks on the asphalt Dad had repaved 3 years ago. The sound of the engine faded, leaving us in the quiet of the suburban street. Jenny sat down on the porch steps, suddenly looking exhausted. That was awful. Yeah, he's going to fight us with everything he has. I know. She looked up at me. Are you ready for that? For a long, ugly legal battle? For Rick trying to destroy your reputation the way he tried to destroy Dad's? I thought about the last 5 years. The early morning medication schedules. The emergency room visits at 3 a.m. The hospice discussions about palliative care versus aggressive treatment. The final days when Dad could barely speak, but held my hand and mouthed, "Thank you. I'm ready," I said. Jenny nodded. Then let's burn his world down. Section 4. Building the case. Margaret Chen's office in Des Moines occupied the top floor of the Ruin Center, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Iowa state capitol. The estate attorney herself was a small woman in her mid-50s with steel-gray hair and the kind of piercing intelligence that made you understand why she'd never lost a case. She listened to our story for 90 minutes without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a leather portfolio. When we finished, she sat back in her chair and studied us both. This is the most comprehensively documented will contest case I've seen in 30 years of practice," she said finally. "Your father essentially built your case for you from beyond the grave." "Can we win?" Jenny asked. "Win?" Margaret smiled. "Mrs. Mitchell, this isn't a question of winning. It's a question of how badly you want to destroy your brother, legally, financially, and criminally, because that's what's going to happen if we proceed." "We proceed," I said immediately. Margaret nodded. "Then here's the strategy. We're going to attack on 3 fronts simultaneously: civil, criminal, and professional." She pulled up a presentation on the large screen behind her desk. Front 1. Civil probate action. We file the will contest immediately, arguing forgery, lack of testamentary capacity, and undue influence. The evidence is overwhelming. Bernard Henderson's confession alone would win us this case, but combined with your father's video testimony, the timeline inconsistencies, and the documentary evidence, we'll have the forged will thrown out within 60 days. She clicked to the next slide. Front 2. Criminal prosecution. We forward all evidence to the Polk County District Attorney's Office and to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, forgery, witness tampering. Your brother's looking at multiple federal charges with mandatory minimum sentencing. The DA's office will love this case because it's completely documented. They won't even need to investigate. We've done all their work for them. Next slide. Front 3. Professional destruction. We file formal ethics complaints with the Illinois State Bar Association and the Iowa State Bar Association. Your brother's law license will be suspended immediately upon filing, pending investigation. Given the evidence, he'll be permanently disbarred within 6 months. He'll never practice law again anywhere in the United States. The slides continued, each one detailing a different aspect of Rick's impending destruction: asset seizures, credit destruction, professional reputation, annihilation. Criminal sentencing guidelines suggesting 8 to 12 years in federal prison. What about Bernard Henderson? Jenny asked. Mr. Henderson's cooperation will be valuable in securing convictions. I've already spoken with his criminal defense attorney. They're negotiating a plea agreement where Bernard testifies fully against your brother in exchange for reduced charges. He'll likely lose his law license and face some jail time, but probably less than 2 years with good behavior. Margaret leaned forward, her expression serious. I need to ask you both something. This level of legal warfare will be public, ugly, and permanent. Your family's dirty laundry will be displayed in court filings, newspaper articles, and public records. Your brother will likely attempt character assassination, digging up any mistakes or embarrassments from your past. He'll make you look as bad as possible to try to create reasonable doubt about his guilt. She looked at me specifically. David, you left a good job to care for your father. Your brother's going to argue that you manipulated a dying man, isolated him from other family, and forged this entire conspiracy to steal an inheritance you don't deserve. He'll attack your finances, your career choices, your personal relationships. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Dad's final weeks, the morphine dosages I'd calculated carefully to manage his pain without over-sedating him, the nights I'd slept in a chair next to his bed because he was afraid of dying alone, the last conversation where he'd squeezed my hand and whispered, "You were the best of us, David. Don't ever forget that." Let him try, I said. Margaret smiled. Good answer. Jenny, what about you? Your brother will likely try to paint you as a greedy corporate shark who abandoned your dying father and is now swooping in for money. Jenny's expression could have frozen nitrogen. Margaret, I negotiated hostile takeovers for 7 years. I've been called worse things by better people. Rick can say whatever he wants. It won't change the facts. Excellent. Margaret closed her portfolio. Then we move forward. My retainer is $50,000. After that, I bill at $7.50 an hour. Given the complexity and the expected resistance from your brother, I'd estimate total costs around $200,000 before this is finished. Jenny pulled out her checkbook without hesitation. Consider this a down payment on justice. As Margaret's assistant photocopied documents and prepared filing paperwork, I stepped out onto the office balcony overlooking downtown Des Moines. The city sparkled in the late afternoon sun, busy and indifferent to the legal war we were about to launch. My phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. You're making a terrible mistake. Last chance to settle this privately, before lawyers get involved and destroy everything. I showed the text to Jenny, who joined me on the balcony. He's panicking, she observed. Probably spent the last 18 hours calling criminal defense attorneys and realizing how screwed he is. Should we respond? No. Let him sweat. Jenny put her phone away. Margaret's drafting the will contest filing now. It'll be submitted to the court by 5 p.m. today. Tomorrow morning, the district attorney's office gets the criminal complaint. By noon, Rick's professional life will be over. No going back after this. Jenny looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. David, do you remember what Mom used to say when we were kids and someone at school would bully us? Which thing? Mom had a lot of sayings. She'd say, you can forgive someone who hurts you, but if they hurt someone you love, you make them regret it for the rest of their life. Jenny's voice went soft. Rick hurt Dad, mocked him, forged his final wishes. That's unforgivable. Dad would tell us not to be vindictive. Dad also left us a video specifically telling us to fight back with everything we've got. She smiled. We're honoring his wishes. The real ones. At 4:47 p.m., Margaret Chen's assistant delivered the finalized will contest filing. 93 pages of legal documentation, supported by 340 pages of evidence exhibits. It read like an indictment of everything Rick had done, documented with surgical precision. At 5:02 p.m., the filing was submitted electronically to the Polk County Probate Court. At 5:15 p.m., my phone rang. Rick's number. I let it go to voicemail. The message he left was incoherent with rage. You son of a bitch! You actually filed. Do you have any idea what you've done? The court just froze all the estate assets. My creditors are calling, David. I needed that money to... A long pause, heavy breathing. This isn't over. I swear to God, I will make you pay for this. Jenny listened to the voicemail and raised an eyebrow. Threatening messages. Great. Forward that to Margaret and to the police. Let's add witness intimidation to his growing list of crimes. At 6:30 p.m., we drove back to Davenport. The 2-hour drive passed in comfortable silence, both of us processing what we'd set in motion. Do you think we're doing the right thing? I asked as we approached the city limits. Jenny didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was quiet but certain. Dad spent 40 years building a life and a legacy. Rick tried to steal it in 6 months. We're not destroying Rick, David. He destroyed himself. We're just making sure he doesn't take Dad's memory down with him. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Subject line, emergency hearing scheduled. Estate of Robert James Mitchell. The probate court had scheduled an emergency hearing for March 12th, 5 days away. Both parties were required to appear with counsel. All estate assets remained frozen until the hearing concluded. The war had officially begun. The 5 days before the emergency hearing felt like standing on a knife's edge. Every morning brought new developments, new threats, new attempts by Rick to derail what was coming. Day 1, March 7th, Margaret Chen called at 8:17 a.m. Your brother hired Clayton Marsh. I'd heard the name. Everyone in Iowa legal circles had. Clayton Marsh was the attorney you hired when you were guilty and needed someone willing to fight dirty. He'd defended politicians caught in bribery scandals, businessmen accused of securities fraud, and at least 2 credibly accused murderers who'd walked free on technicalities. How worried should we be? I asked. Not very.
Marsh is good at creating reasonable doubt in criminal cases. But this is probate court, and we have documentary evidence of forgery. There's no reasonable doubt to create.
Your brother just spent $100,000 he doesn't have on a lawyer who can't save him. She paused. But it means the hearing will be uglier than expected. Marsh's strategy when the facts are against him is character assassination. He'll try to destroy your credibility, paint you as a manipulative son who isolated a dying father. Expect personal attacks. Let him try. That afternoon, a process server delivered a thick envelope, Rick's counter-filing to the will contest. I sat at Dad's kitchen table, our temporary headquarters, and read through Marsh's opening salvo. It was vicious. The filing claimed I'd taken advantage of Dad's declining mental state, isolated him from family, controlled his medications and access to visitors, and created a dependency relationship where Dad feared contradicting me. It suggested I'd forged the original 2021 will and manufactured the video evidence. It painted me as a failed engineer who'd attached myself to a wealthy father like a parasite. Jenny read over my shoulder, her face darkening with each page. This is insane. Half of these facts are complete fabrications. That's the point. Throw enough mud and hope some sticks. I flipped to the witness list. Rick had assembled 8 people willing to testify about my character defects and Dad's concerns about David's dependency. 3 were Rick's business associates who'd never met Dad. 2 were distant cousins who'd attended Dad's funeral but hadn't visited him once during his illness. 1 was a former co-worker from my engineering job who I'd had a professional disagreement with 6 years ago. And 1 was Dr. Patricia Morrison, the physician who'd supposedly assessed Dad's mental competency when signing the forged will. Dr. Morrison, I said slowly. She's the key.
If we can prove she never actually examined Dad on January 18th, the entire medical competency claim collapses. Jenny pulled out her laptop.
Let me see what I can find about her. Day 2, March 8th. I woke up to 17 missed calls and a voicemail that made my blood run cold. Rick's voice, slurred with alcohol. You think you're so smart, little brother. Think you've got everything figured out. But I know things about you. Things that would change how people see perfect David Mitchell. Remember Sarah, your girlfriend from Minneapolis. The one you abandoned when you moved back to take care of Dad. A long pause, ice clinking in a glass. I called her yesterday, had a nice long chat. She told me some interesting things about why you two really broke up, about your anger issues, about the night you threw a phone across the room during an argument, about how scared she was sometimes. My hands shook as I held the phone. Sarah and I had broken up because of the distance and stress, not anger issues. Yes, I'd thrown a phone once during a heated argument about my father's declining health, thrown it at a couch, not at her. It had been a moment of frustration, not violence. But Marsh would twist it into evidence of an abusive personality. Forward that to Margaret, immediately, Jenny said, when I played it for her. And to the police. That's witness tampering and intimidation. Dr. Patricia Morrison's background check came back that afternoon. Jenny had hired a private investigator, the same one Dad had used, to dig into the doctor's history. The report was illuminating. Dr. Morrison had graduated from a Caribbean medical school with mediocre credentials. Her medical license had been suspended twice, once for improper prescription practices, once for fraudulent billing to Medicare. She maintained a small practice seeing mostly cash pay patients who didn't care about credentials. And 6 months ago, she'd been sued by a patient's family for medical malpractice. The plaintiff's attorney, Richard Allen Mitchell. Rick represented her in a malpractice suit, Jenny said, reading the report. And then she conveniently becomes the physician who certified Dad's mental competency. That's not a coincidence. She owed him, or he had leverage on her. Either way, her testimony is compromised. Margaret needs to see this. Day 3, March 9th, the Iowa State Bar Association issued its formal notice. Richard Allen Mitchell's law license was suspended effective immediately, pending investigation of ethics violations related to estate of Robert James Mitchell. The news hit the legal blogs by noon. By 2 p.m., it was in the Des Moines Register. Prominent Chicago attorney suspended amid will forgery allegations. Rick's carefully constructed professional reputation began its public disintegration. My phone rang. An unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mr. Mitchell, this is Marcus Mitchell, your nephew, Rick's son. I hadn't spoken to Marcus since before his parents' divorce 3 years ago. He'd been 9 then, a quiet kid who loved basketball and science fiction. Marcus, hi, how are you? Is it true? His 12-year-old voice cracked with emotion. What they're saying about my dad. Did he really forge Grandpa's will? My throat tightened. This was collateral damage I hadn't fully considered. Marcus, this is complicated adult stuff. I'm not stupid. Anger now mixed with hurt. Everyone at school is talking about it. Their parents saw the news. They're saying my dad's a criminal, a thief, that he stole from his own dying father. I closed my eyes. Your dad made some bad choices. Very bad choices. But that doesn't... Is he going to jail? The question hung in the air. I could lie to spare the kid's feelings. Or I could tell the truth and let him start processing what was coming. Probably. Yeah, I'm sorry, Marcus. Silence. Then, Uncle David, can I ask you something? Anything. Is it true that you took care of Grandpa, like every day for years? I did. Dad said you were taking advantage of him, using him for money. But Mom said that was bullshit. Sorry. She said it wasn't true. She said you gave up everything to take care of Grandpa when he was sick. Your mom's right. Another long pause. I miss Grandpa. Dad wouldn't let me visit very much because he said it was too depressing. But I wanted to see him. My vision blurred. He wanted to see you too, Marcus. He talked about you all the time. Was so proud of you. Really? Really? He kept newspaper clippings from your science fair wins. Had photos of you all over his room. Marcus's voice went thick. I hate my dad for what he did. Is that bad? No, buddy. It's not bad. It's honest. And sometimes the people who are supposed to love us hurt us the most. That's not your fault. Uncle David, after this is all over, could I maybe come visit you sometimes, see Grandpa's house? I just want to feel close to him again. The lump in my throat made speaking difficult. Anytime you want, Marcus. I'll even take you fishing at the same spots Grandpa took me when I was your age. Thanks. A pause. I hope you win. What Dad did was wrong. Grandpa wouldn't want that. After we hung up, I sat in Dad's living room and cried for the second time since this nightmare began. Not for Rick, who'd made his choices, but for Marcus, who'd done nothing wrong except be born to the wrong father. Jenny found me 20 minutes later. You okay? Rick's son just called. Asked if his dad was going to jail. Oh God. What did you tell him? The truth. He deserved that much. I wiped my eyes. Jen, we're destroying that kid's father. However justified it is, Marcus is going to live with this for the rest of his life. Jenny sat next to me on Dad's couch. David, Rick destroyed himself. We're just making sure he faces consequences. Marcus will understand that, eventually. Kids are resilient. Are they? I'm not sure I would have been resilient if our dad had turned out to be a criminal. Our dad wasn't a criminal. He was a good man who raised us to know right from wrong, which is why we're doing this. She squeezed my shoulder. Rick made choices that hurt his son. That's on him, not us. Day 4, March 10th. Bernard Henderson's full deposition arrived via courier. 147 pages of sworn testimony detailing every aspect of the conspiracy. Margaret had spent 8 hours questioning him, and he'd answered everything with brutal honesty. The deposition read like a confession. Q. Mr. Henderson, did you personally witness Robert Mitchell sign the will dated January 24, 2025? A. No, I did not. Q. Did Robert Mitchell sign that will at all? A. No. Richard Mitchell forged his father's signature using samples he'd collected over several months. Q. Were you present when the forgery occurred? A. Yes. It happened in my office on January 18, 2025, at approximately 7 p.m. Richard had stayed late after normal business hours. He practiced the signature multiple times until he was satisfied. Q. And you witnessed this forgery? A. I did. Q. Why didn't you stop it? A. Because I was complicit. I had agreed to participate in exchange for $500,000 and Richard's promise not to expose my casino investment losses. The deposition continued in devastating detail. Elena Rodriguez's recruitment through an agency called Legal Actors LLC that provided people to pose as witnesses for legal scenarios and dramatizations. The $25,000 payment made in cash. The coaching sessions where Rick had taught Elena exactly what to say about Dad's mental competency. Dr. Morrison's involvement was equally damning. Q. What was Dr. Patricia Morrison's role in this conspiracy? A. Richard represented Dr. Morrison in a medical malpractice case 6 months prior. The case was settled quietly, but Richard had discovered evidence during discovery that Morrison had falsified patient records in other cases. He used this information to convince her to provide a backdated medical assessment, claiming Robert Mitchell was of sound mind on January 18th. Q. Did Dr. Morrison actually examine Robert Mitchell on that date? A. No, she never examined him at all. The assessment was completely fabricated based on medical records Richard provided her. Margaret attached a cover note. This deposition alone would win our case. But, combined with everything else, we're not just winning, we're annihilating their defense. Marsh is going to have a very bad day in court. That evening, Rick's Tesla appeared in Dad's driveway again. I watched from the window as my brother sat behind the wheel for 15 minutes, not moving. Finally, he got out and walked to the porch. I opened the door before he could knock. He looked terrible. The expensive suit was wrinkled. His face was unshaven, his eyes bloodshot. The Rolex was gone, probably pawned. "Can we talk?" His voice was hoarse. "Just 5 minutes. Your lawyer advised you not to contact me directly." "Fuck my lawyer. Fuck all the lawyers." Rick's laugh was bitter. "Do you know what Clayton Marsh told me yesterday? He said my case is unwinnable, that the best he can do is try to mitigate the criminal charges. He wants me to plead guilty to everything and hope for a reduced sentence. Probably good advice. Probably." Rick sagged against the porch railing. "I'm going to lose everything, aren't I? The estate, my law license, my freedom, everything." "Yes. Good." The word came out like a sigh. "I deserve it." I stared at my brother, looking for the trick, the manipulation, but he just looked exhausted, defeated. "Why are you here, Rick?" "To apologize for what I did to Dad, to you and Jenny, to Marcus." He met my eyes for the first time. "I know it doesn't matter. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need to say it anyway. You forged our dying father's will. You mocked his memory. You tried to steal everything he worked for." My voice was steady, cold. "Your apology means nothing." "I know." Rick nodded slowly. "I was drowning, David. The debt, the gambling, the failed investments. I looked at Dad's estate and saw salvation. And I convinced myself I deserved it more than you, because I'd been the successful one, the achiever, the one who'd made something of himself." He laughed bitterly. "But I hadn't made anything. I'd built a house of cards on credit and lies."
You were the successful one. You're the one who actually sacrificed something meaningful. I just took and never gave back. Is this supposed to make me feel sorry for you? No. It's supposed to make you understand that I know what I am.
A selfish, weak, pathetic excuse for a son and brother. Rick straightened up. "Tomorrow in court, I'm going to withdraw my contest to your will challenge. I'm going to admit everything publicly. And then I'm going to plead guilty to whatever charges the DA files." I searched his face for deception. "Why?" "Because Marcus called me today, said he'd talk to you, said you were kind to him, even though I've been destroying your life." Rick's voice broke. "He said he wanted to spend time with you instead of me." That tells me everything I need to know about who the better man is. He turned to leave, then stopped. "Dad was right about you. You were the best of us. I just couldn't stand to admit it." I watched Rick drive away, feeling nothing but emptiness where anger had been. Tomorrow would bring closure, but closure wasn't the same as healing. Day 5, March 11th. Margaret Chen called at 6:30 a.m. "Turn on the news." I fumbled for the TV remote. The morning news anchors looked somber. "Breaking overnight. Attorney Richard Mitchell has been arrested by the FBI on federal charges, including wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and elder abuse." Mitchell, who was already under investigation for allegedly forging his father's will. The screen showed footage of Rick being led from his Chicago apartment in handcuffs, head down, surrounded by federal agents. "The arrest warrant was sealed until this morning," Margaret explained. "The U.S. Attorney's Office moved faster than expected. They have him on wire fraud because he used electronic bank transfers to pay Elena Rodriguez. Federal charges mean federal sentencing guidelines. Rick's looking at a minimum of 8 years. The hearing is still happening today. Yes, but it's now a formality. With Rick in federal custody and facing criminal charges, his will contest is dead on arrival. The judge will declare the 2021 will valid, restore the three-way split, and this will be over." Just like that? Just like that. Justice isn't always slow, David. Sometimes it's blindingly fast. Section 2. The courtroom. The Polk County Courthouse felt different on March 12th. Usually probate hearings were quiet, administrative affairs. Today the gallery was packed with reporters, curious attorneys, and people who'd heard about the case. Jenny and I sat at the plaintiff's table with Margaret Chen. At the defense table, Clayton Marsh sat alone. No Rick, just an empty chair that spoke volumes. Judge Patricia Hendricks, no relation to Bernard Henderson, entered at precisely 9 a.m. She was in her mid-60s, with the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent 30 years separating family squabbles from legal facts. "This is an emergency hearing regarding the estate of Robert James Mitchell," she began.
I've reviewed the filings from both parties, including the evidence submitted by the plaintiffs contesting the will, dated January 24, 2025.
I've also read Bernard Henderson's deposition and reviewed the video testimony from the deceased. She looked at Clayton Marsh. "Counselor, I understand your client was arrested by federal authorities yesterday. How do you wish to proceed?" Marsh stood, and for the first time, he looked uncomfortable. "Your Honor, given the criminal charges now pending against Mr. Richard Mitchell, and after consultation with my client, we are withdrawing all challenges to the will contest. We concede that the will dated January 24, 2025 was improperly executed and should not be admitted to probate." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Margaret squeezed my hand under the table. Judge Hendricks made a note. "Very well. Does your client wish to make any statement to the court?" "He does, Your Honor. Mr. Mitchell has prepared a written statement that I'll read into the record with the court's permission." "Proceed." Marsh pulled out a single sheet of paper. His voice was flat, professional, but the words hit like hammers. "I, Richard Allen Mitchell, acknowledge that I conspired with Bernard Henderson and others to forge the will of my father, Robert James Mitchell. I created a fraudulent document with the intent to deprive my siblings of their rightful inheritance. I manipulated witnesses, falsified medical assessments, and betrayed the trust of a dying man who deserved better from his son." The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of court reporters' pens. "I apologize to my brother David and my sister Jennifer for the pain I've caused. I apologize to my son Marcus for the shame I've brought to our family. And I apologize to the memory of my father, whose only crime was loving a son who didn't deserve it." Marsh set down the paper. "Mr. Mitchell takes full responsibility for his actions and will plead guilty to all criminal charges filed against him." Judge Hendricks's expression didn't change, but I saw something soften in her eyes. "Thank you, Counselor. The court acknowledges Mr. Richard Mitchell's statement." She turned to our table. "Ms. Chen, what is the plaintiff's position?" Margaret stood. "Your Honor, the plaintiffs request that the court declare the will, dated January 24, 2025, invalid and restore the will dated March 15, 2021, as the valid last testament of Robert James Mitchell. That will divide the estate equally among his 3 children, Richard, David, and Jennifer Mitchell." "Equally?" Judge Hendricks raised an eyebrow. "Including Mr. Richard Mitchell, who just confessed to forging his father's will." "Yes, Your Honor."
Despite his actions, the 2021 will represents Robert Mitchell's true intentions. He wanted his children to share equally in his estate.
"My clients believe honoring their father's wishes is more important than punishing their brother." I hadn't known Margaret was going to say that. Jenny's hand found mine. Judge Hendricks looked at me directly. "Mr. David Mitchell, is this your position? You want your brother to receive an equal share despite his forgery?" I stood up, my legs shaky. "It is, Your Honor." "May I ask why?" The question hung in the air. Everyone in the courtroom was waiting for my answer. "Because my father believed in forgiveness more than revenge," I said quietly. "He left that will in 2021 because he loved all 3 of his children, even the ones who disappointed him. Taking Rick's share wouldn't honor Dad's memory. It would just make me like Rick, using Dad's death to serve my own sense of justice." Judge Hendricks studied me for a long moment. "That's remarkably magnanimous given what your brother attempted to do to you. My father taught me that character is what you do when you have the power to hurt someone and choose not to." I glanced at the empty defense table. "Rick's going to prison. He's lost his career. his reputation, his freedom. He'll live with what he did for the rest of his life. That's punishment enough. The judge nodded slowly. The court is impressed by the plaintiff's grace in this matter. However, I have concerns about allowing someone who attempted to defraud an estate to benefit from that estate, Margaret interjected. Your Honor, Mr. Richard Mitchell's share could be placed in a trust for his minor son, Marcus Mitchell. That way, the father's crimes don't punish an innocent child, and Robert Mitchell's intention to provide for his grandson is honored. An excellent suggestion, Judge Hendricks made a notation. Very well. The court makes the following findings. The will dated January 24, 2025 was procured through fraud and forgery and is therefore invalid and void. The will dated March 15, 2021 is the valid last testament of Robert James Mitchell. She looked up from her notes. The estate, valued at approximately $8 million, shall be divided equally among Robert Mitchell's 3 children. Richard Mitchell's share shall be placed in a trust for the benefit of his son, Marcus Mitchell, to be administered by David Mitchell as trustee until Marcus reaches age 25. My eyes stung. Dad's grandson would be provided for, even though Dad's son had betrayed everything. Additionally, Judge Hendricks continued, the court notes that David Mitchell's care for his father during his final illness represents a significant contribution to the estate's preservation. The court awards David Mitchell additional compensation of $250,000 from the estate for 5 years of caregiving services to be paid prior to the division of remaining assets. Your Honor, I said quickly, I don't need. The court's ruling stands, Mr. Mitchell. You sacrificed your career and resources to care for your father. That has value, both monetary and moral. This is not generosity. It's acknowledgement of services rendered. She banged her gavel. The estate is hereby settled, according to the 2021 will, with modifications as stated. This hearing is adjourned. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Reporters scrambled for exits to file their stories. Clayton Marsh packed his briefcase with the air of a man grateful the ordeal was over. Margaret turned to us. That was unexpected. I've never seen a judge award caregiving compensation in a probate case. She really wanted to make a point about your character versus your brother's. Jenny hugged me, tears streaming down her face. Dad would be proud of you. Of us, I corrected. We did this together. As we left the courthouse, a young man approached tentatively. Marcus Mitchell, looking small in a too-big jacket, his eyes red from crying. Uncle David, can I talk to you? I stepped away from Jenny and Margaret. Of course, Marcus. I was in the courtroom. I heard what you did about keeping my dad's share for me. His voice cracked. You didn't have to do that. Your grandfather wanted to provide for you. What your dad did doesn't change that. But I'm his son. Doesn't that make me? It makes you his son. Nothing more, nothing less. You're not responsible for his choices. I put a hand on his shoulder. You're going to be okay, Marcus. You've got family who loves you. Will you really be my trustee? Until I'm 25, if that's okay with you and your mom. Marcus nodded, wiping his eyes. That's like 13 years from now. That's a long time to be stuck with me. I'm not stuck with you. I'm honored to help you. I managed to smile. Besides, someone needs to take you fishing and teach you all of Grandpa's terrible jokes. For the first time since this nightmare began, Marcus smiled. A real smile, not weighted down by grief or shame. Uncle David, do you think Grandpa would still love my dad, even after everything? The question broke my heart. Yeah, buddy, I think he would, because that's what dads do. They love their kids even when their kids screw up. Do you still love him, my dad? I thought about that, about Rick's confession on the porch, his broken apology, his final acknowledgement that he'd destroyed everything, about the brother I'd grown up with before greed and desperation twisted him into someone I didn't recognize. I love who he used to be, I said finally, and I hope prison gives him a chance to find that person again. Marcus nodded like that made sense. His mom appeared, Sarah Mitchell, Rick's ex-wife. and gave me a grateful look before leading her son away. Jenny rejoined me on the courthouse steps. "You okay?" "Yeah, just tired." "It's over, David. You won." I watched Marcus and his mother disappear into the parking garage. Did I? Because it doesn't feel like winning. It feels like everyone lost, and I'm just the least damaged person standing. "That's what justice feels like sometimes," Jenny said quietly. Not triumphant, just necessary. September 15th, 2025. The federal courtroom in Chicago was smaller than I expected. Colder, too, despite the late summer heat outside. I sat in the gallery next to Jenny, both of us wearing the kind of somber clothes you wear to funerals and sentencing hearings. Rick stood before Judge Michael Patterson in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. 6 months in federal detention had aged him a decade. The confident attorney who'd stepped out of his Tesla in March was gone, replaced by someone who looked hollowed out from the inside. "Mr. Mitchell," Judge Patterson began, reading from the sentencing report. "You have pleaded guilty to 1 count of wire fraud, 1 count of conspiracy to commit fraud, 1 count of elder abuse, and 1 count of forgery of legal documents. The pre-sentence investigation recommends a sentence of 96 months in federal prison." 8 years. Rick's face remained impassive, but I saw his shoulders tighten. "However," the judge continued, "the court has considered several mitigating factors. Your complete cooperation with federal investigators, your public acceptance of responsibility, your voluntary restitution efforts, and perhaps most significantly, your victims' requests for leniency." Rick's head turned slightly, his eyes finding mine across the courtroom. "Your brother, David Mitchell, has submitted a letter to this court asking for a reduced sentence. He writes, and I quote, "My brother's crimes were terrible, but they were born from desperation rather than malice. He has lost everything, his career, his reputation, his freedom. I believe he can be rehabilitated, and I believe my father would want me to show mercy rather than vengeance." Judge Patterson set down the letter. "Mr. Mitchell, you should know that such magnanimity is rare in cases like these. Your brother would have been justified in demanding the maximum sentence. Instead, he has chosen grace." Rick's jaw clenched. I couldn't tell if he was fighting tears or anger. "Taking all factors into consideration, the court sentences you to 60 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You will also pay restitution of $50,000 to your siblings for legal costs incurred, and you will be permanently barred from practicing law in any jurisdiction. 5 years instead of 8. Rick's lawyer, a public defender this time, exhaled in relief. "Mr. Mitchell, do you wish to address the court before sentencing is imposed?" Rick nodded. When he spoke, his voice was rough from months of silence. "Your Honor, I want to thank my brother for his mercy. I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful for it. I also want to say something to David and Jenny directly, if I may." Judge Patterson nodded. Rick turned to face us fully. "I destroyed our family because I was too proud to admit I was failing, too ashamed to ask for help, too convinced that I deserved Dad's money more than the people who actually loved him. I stole from a dying man and mocked his memory. There's no punishment harsh enough for that." His voice broke slightly. "But David, you chose mercy anyway. You honored Dad's will even though it meant giving money to the person who tried to steal everything from you. That's the kind of person Dad raised you to be. It's the kind of person I should have been, but wasn't." He looked at Jenny. "Jen, I'm sorry for offering you $50,000 like it was charity. You deserved every penny of your inheritance, and I was a condescending bastard for pretending otherwise." Jenny's hand found mine, squeezing tight. "I'll spend the next 5 years thinking about what I did," Rick concluded. And then I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be half the man my brother already is. That's all, Your Honor." Judge Patterson banged his gavel. "The sentence is imposed. The defendant will be remanded to Federal Correctional Institution Sandstone in Minnesota to begin serving his sentence. This court is adjourned." Federal marshals led Rick away. He looked back once, meeting my eyes, and mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Then he was gone. Outside the courthouse, Jenny and I stood in the September sunshine, processing what had just happened. 5 years, she said. With good behavior, he could be out in 4. Yeah. Do you think he meant what he said in there, about trying to change? I thought about that. I think he means it now. Whether he'll still mean it in 5 years when he gets out, I don't know. People either break in prison, or they find something real in themselves. We'll see which one Rick is. Are you going to visit him? Eventually. Not right away. He needs time to sit with what he did without me providing comfort. But yeah, eventually. He's still my brother. Jenny smiled sadly. Dad would approve. Dad would tell me I'm an idiot and then secretly be proud. We walked to the parking garage where Jenny's rental car waited. She was flying back to Seattle tonight. I was driving back to Davenport to a life that looked completely different than it had 6 months ago. The new life. The house on Oakwood Drive had been too big and too full of memories to keep. I'd sold it in July for $920,000 to a young family with 3 kids who promised to love it the way Dad had. Watching them walk through the rooms where I'd cared for my father had been harder than I expected, but also healing somehow. The house would have new memories now, happy ones. I'd used part of my inheritance to buy a smaller place, a renovated Craftsman in the historic district, with a workshop in the garage and a screened porch overlooking a garden. The kind of house I'd always wanted but couldn't afford when I was supporting Dad. The engineering firm in Minneapolis had offered me my old position back with a 20% raise. I'd turned them down. Instead, I'd started my own consulting business, specializing in accessibility design, making buildings and homes safer and more functional for elderly and disabled people. Everything I'd learned during 5 years of caregiving had become the foundation of a career that actually mattered. The business was small but growing. And more importantly, it let me make my own hours, which meant I could do things like take Marcus fishing on Saturday mornings. My nephew had become a regular presence in my life. Sarah, Rick's ex-wife, had been grateful when I'd offered to maintain the relationship with Marcus. Despite everything, every other weekend, Marcus would stay with me. We'd work on science projects in the garage workshop, watch terrible sci-fi movies, and talk about everything from school drama to his complicated feelings about his father. "Do you think Dad's okay in prison?" Marcus had asked me last month while we were fishing at the same lake where Dad had taught me to cast. "Prison's not easy," I'd told him honestly. "But your dad's smart and tough. He'll survive. But will he be the same when he gets out? No. Nobody's the same after something like that. But maybe he'll be better. Sometimes people need to lose everything before they can figure out what actually matters." Marcus had nodded like that made sense, then caught a 3-pound bass that would have made his grandfather proud. The trust fund for Marcus now held approximately $2.6 million, Rick's third of the estate, minus legal fees and restitution. Invested conservatively, it would be worth somewhere north of $5 million by the time Marcus turned 25. He'd be able to go to any college he wanted, start any business, live without the financial fear that had destroyed his father. Jenny had used her share to pay off her mortgage, fund her kids' college accounts, and start a nonprofit, providing free financial literacy education to low-income families.
If financial desperation can turn someone like Rick into a criminal, she'd said, then maybe better financial education can prevent the next Rick. My share, roughly $2.8 million after the caregiving compensation, sat mostly in safe investments.
I'd used some to start the business, some to buy the house, and some to establish a scholarship fund at the community college in Dad's name for students studying construction trades. The money was life-changing, but it wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was the photo on my desk of Dad and me at his 70th birthday party, both of us laughing at some terrible joke he'd just told. What mattered was Marcus's science fair trophy, sitting on my bookshelf, next to Dad's old coffee mug. What mattered was the garden I was building in the backyard where I'd eventually spread Dad's ashes. What mattered was that I'd fought for my father's memory and won, not with vengeance but with integrity. The others. Bernard Henderson had negotiated a plea deal for his cooperation. He'd served 9 months in county jail, lost his law license permanently, and was now working as a paralegal for a public defender's office. He'd called me once after his release to apologize again. I'd accepted and told him I hoped he found peace. We hadn't spoken since. Elena Rodriguez, the actress who'd played hospice nurse, had been charged with conspiracy to commit fraud. She'd cooperated fully, testifying against Rick in exchange for probation and a $10,000 fine. According to the investigator, she'd moved back to Los Angeles and quit the legal acting business entirely. Last I heard, she was working at a preschool and going to community college to become a real nurse. Penance through service, perhaps. Dr. Patricia Morrison had lost her medical license permanently and faced criminal charges for falsifying medical documents. She'd pleaded guilty and received 3 years of probation plus a $50,000 fine. The medical board had made an example of her, and rightfully so. Doctors who forged patient assessments for money deserved to lose their licenses. Clayton Marsh, Rick's attorney, had quietly removed the Mitchell case from his firm's website and resumed defending rich criminals with better documented cases. He'd sent me a surprisingly gracious note after the sentencing. Your mercy toward your brother was the most effective closing argument I've ever witnessed.
It reminded me why I got into law in the first place. Not to win, but to help people find their humanity in impossible situations. October 3rd, 2025. 6 months and 3 weeks later, I was in the workshop, building a wheelchair ramp prototype, when my
phone rang. Unknown number from Minnesota, the state where Rick's prison was located. This is a collect call from an inmate at Federal Correctional Institution Sandstone. Will you accept charges? Yes. Static. Then Rick's voice. David, it's me. Hey, Rick. How are you holding up? As well as can be expected. The food's terrible, the company's worse, and I have a lot of time to think about my life choices. A pause. Too much time, honestly. That's kind of the point. Yeah, he laughed without humor. Listen, I don't have long. They monitor these calls and limit time, but I wanted to tell you something. Okay, I've been going to the prison psychologist, talking about the gambling addiction, the debt, the choices that led me here, and she asked me when I stopped seeing you as my brother and started seeing you as competition. I leaned against the workbench, listening. I couldn't answer her at first. Rick continued, but I've been thinking about it for weeks, and I realized it was when Mom died. When she was sick, you dropped everything to take care of her, just like you did with Dad. And I remember feeling resentful, like you were trying to be the perfect son and make me look bad. That was never my intention. I know, that's the thing. You were never trying to compete. You were just being who you are, kind, loyal, selfless. And instead of being inspired by that, I turned it into a competition where I had to prove I was more successful, more important, more worthy of Dad's respect. His voice thickened with emotion. By the time Dad was dying, I'd convinced myself that inheritance was the only thing that mattered, that if I got the money, it would prove I'd won, that I'd finally be the better son. Rick, let me finish, please. I need to say this. He took a shaky breath. But I was wrong. Completely, catastrophically wrong. You'd already won, David. You won every time you sat with Dad through chemo, every time you managed his medications, every time you held his hand when he was scared. You won by being there, and I lost by thinking winning mattered more than just showing up. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 6 months of anger and grief and complicated forgiveness pressing down on my chest. The psychologist asked me what I want when I get out of prison, Rick said. Ahem. And I told her I want to be someone my son isn't ashamed of. Someone my brother might actually want to have dinner with occasionally. Someone Dad would have been proud of, even if it took me 48 years and a felony conviction to get there. That's a good goal, David. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I hurt you in ways that can't be fixed. But I need you to know that your mercy, your decision to honor Dad's will even for me, that changed something in me. It showed me what real strength looks like. And I'm going to spend every day of the next 4 years trying to earn a fraction of the grace you've already given me. The automated voice interrupted. You have 30 seconds remaining. I have to go, Rick said quickly. Thank you for accepting the call. Thank you for everything. And tell Marcus. Tell him his dad is trying to be better. I will. And Rick, Dad would be proud that you're trying. That's all he ever wanted from any of us. To keep trying. Thanks, little brother. His voice broke on the last word. I love you. I love you too. The line went dead. I stood in the workshop for a long time, holding the phone, letting myself feel all the complicated emotions that came with loving someone who'd hurt you badly, but was trying, genuinely trying, to change. Maybe that was the real lesson Dad had tried to teach us. Not that family was everything, but that family was worth fighting for even when it disappointed you. Worth forgiving, even when forgiveness was hard. Worth believing in, even when belief required faith over evidence. November 8th, 2025. 7 months later. The memorial service for Dad was smaller than his funeral had been. Just family and close friends gathering at the lake where he'd taught me to fish, where I'd brought Marcus, where 3 generations of Mitchell men had spent summer afternoons talking about everything and nothing. Jenny had flown in with her family. Sarah had brought Marcus. A few of Dad's old construction buddies showed up, now in their 70s and 80s, with stories about Robert Mitchell that made everyone laugh and cry in equal measure. We scattered his ashes at sunset, while Marcus read a poem he'd written for school, about grandfathers and legacies and love that outlasts death. Afterward, we had a small reception at my house. Marcus showed everyone the workshop, where we built things together. Jenny's kids ran through the garden. Sarah thanked me again for being present in her son's life when his father couldn't be. As the evening wound down and people started leaving, I found myself alone on the porch with Jenny, watching the last light fade from the sky. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Fighting so hard for the estate, taking Rick down so publicly." "Sometimes, when I think about Marcus and what he lost, when I remember Rick before everything went wrong. But then I remember Dad's video, and how he specifically told me to fight back if Rick tried something. Dad knew Rick better than we did. Dad knew all of us better than we knew ourselves." I sipped my coffee. "He knew I'd need permission to fight, knew you'd need someone to fight alongside, knew Rick's greed would eventually consume him if nobody stopped it. And he knew Marcus would need protection from his father's worst instincts," Jenny added. "That trust fund you're managing, that's not just money. That's Dad making sure his grandson doesn't grow up with the same financial fear that destroyed Rick. 3 generations of lessons in one legal document." Jenny smiled. "Dad was sneaky that way." We sat in comfortable silence, the kind only possible between people who've been through war together and survived. "I'm proud of you," Jenny said finally, "for how you handled all this. For showing mercy when you could have demanded vengeance, for taking care of Marcus when you could have walked away, for being exactly the person Dad raised you to be. We did it together. We did, but you led the way." She stood up, preparing to head to her hotel. "Mom would be proud too. You know that, right?" I thought about Mom, who'd died too young from a stroke that nobody saw coming, who'd taught us that family meant showing up, even when showing up was hard, who'd loved all 3 of her children equally, even when one of them didn't deserve it. "Yeah," I said. "I think she would be." After everyone left, I stood in the garden with Dad's empty urn, feeling the weight of 7 months lifting slightly. The battle was over. Justice had been served. The estate was settled. Dad's wishes had been honored. And most importantly, the family, broken and complicated and dysfunctional as it was, had survived. Rick would be in prison for 4 more years. Bernard Henderson was rebuilding his life, one paralegal case at a time. Elena Rodriguez was learning to actually help people instead of pretending. And I was here in a house I loved, doing work that mattered, raising my nephew part-time and honoring my father's memory every single day. It wasn't the ending I'd expected when I'd found that DVD in Dad's safe, but it was the ending Dad would have wanted. Not perfect, not painless, but honest, merciful, and true to the values he'd spent 40 years trying to instill in 3 imperfect children. I thought about calling the prison, leaving a message for Rick to call me back, but tomorrow was soon enough for that. Tonight was for Dad, for memories, for the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd done right by the man who taught me everything that mattered. "We got him, Dad," I whispered to the darkening sky. "We got the bastards, and we did it your way." with evidence, integrity, and enough mercy to prove we were better than they were. Somewhere, I like to think Dad was smiling. March 4th, 2026. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, exactly 1 year after the emergency hearing that had changed everything. David, I know you probably didn't expect to hear from me outside of our occasional phone calls, but something happened today that I needed to share immediately.
The prison education program accepted my application to teach basic legal literacy to other inmates. Nothing fancy, just helping guys understand their rights, read legal documents, file proper appeals.
But the program director said my application essay was one of the best she'd read. Want to know what I wrote? I wrote about a father who built a construction empire with his hands and his honor, about a brother who sacrificed his career to care for that father, and about a son who threw it all away for money he didn't need and couldn't keep. I wrote about how I'd spent 48 years measuring success by the wrong metrics. Court victories instead of relationships, income instead of integrity, status instead of character. And I wrote about how my little brother taught me what real strength looks like, choosing mercy when vengeance would be easier, honoring a father's wishes even when it meant rewarding the son who'd betrayed him, building a life based on service instead of status. The director said she cried, reading it. Said she could tell I'd actually learned something from my mistakes instead of just serving time. I'm teaching my first class next week. 8 inmates who need help filing motions, understanding plea deals, or just knowing they have rights even in here. I'm terrified. But I'm also excited in a way I haven't been since before law school, before the debt, before I turned into someone Dad wouldn't recognize. Marcus called me yesterday. Said you two are building a solar-powered car for his science fair. He was so excited telling me about the engineering principles you're teaching him. Then he paused and asked if I was proud of him. I told him I was. And then I told him something I should have said years ago, that I'm trying to become someone he can be proud of too. He said, Uncle David says you're trying really hard, and that's what Grandpa would care about. Not where you are, but who you're becoming. Thank you for being the father figure my son needs while I'm in here. Thank you for showing him what healthy masculinity looks like. Strength through service, pride through humility, success through integrity. And thank you for not giving up on me when you had every right to. I have 3 more years in here. 3 more years to teach classes, attend therapy, and figure out who Richard Mitchell actually is, underneath all the fear and pride and desperate need for validation. When I get out, I don't know if you'll want a relationship with me. I don't know if I'll even deserve one, but I'm going to spend these 3 years becoming someone worthy of consideration, someone Dad would recognize, someone you might call brother without regret. Love, Rick P.S. The psychology program here has a family therapy track. If you and Jenny ever wanted to participate in some facilitated conversations about our family dynamics, I'd be open to that. No pressure, just a thought. I read the letter 3 times, sitting at my kitchen table, with morning coffee growing cold. Then I pulled out my phone and texted Jenny. Rick wants to do family therapy. You in? Her response came 2 minutes later. Only if you are, but yeah. Family's family, even when family's complicated. I looked at the photo on my fridge, the one of Dad, Marcus, and me at the lake last summer. 3 generations of Mitchell men, each one trying to be better than our worst instincts, each one learning from the other's mistakes. Maybe that was the real inheritance Dad had left us. Not the money, though that mattered. Not the house, or the business, or the property, but the understanding that family wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, fighting for each other, forgiving the unforgivable. And never, ever giving up on the people you loved, even when they gave you every reason to. Even when they forged your father's will and tried to steal everything you cared about. Even then, I pulled out a piece of paper and started writing back. Rick, I'm proud of you for teaching that class. Dad would be proud too. And yes, I'm open to family therapy. Jenny's in. Let's do this. Also, Marcus's solar car is amazing. You're going to love hearing about it when we visit next month. Keep trying, big brother. That's all any of us can do. David. I sealed the letter, addressed it to Federal Correctional Institution Sandstone, and walked it to the mailbox at the end of my street. The morning sun was warm on my face. The garden was blooming. The workshop in my garage held 3 projects in progress. And somewhere in Minnesota, My brother was teaching other inmates about legal rights and slowly, painfully, becoming someone our father would recognize. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined a year ago. It was better, because revenge would have destroyed Rick. Mercy gave him a chance to rebuild, and in the end, that's what Dad had wanted all along. Not perfect sons, just sons who kept trying to be better. Sons who understood that strength wasn't about winning. It was about having the power to destroy someone and choosing not to. It was about fighting for justice without becoming cruel. It was about honoring the dead by taking care of the living. I walked back to my house, to the life I'd built from the ashes of betrayal, and felt something I hadn't felt since Dad died. Peace.
If you enjoyed this story of justice, redemption, and complicated family love, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours?
How did you balance justice with mercy? For more stories of revenge, redemption, and the complicated relationships that shape our lives, click the video on your screen.